everyone. Welcome to our live stream, Designing an Attitude of Gratitude today with the InLearning Partners. And we have Amanda Moore, who is the District Innovation Coach for Center Grove Schools here south of Indianapolis. And we are talking about designing for empathy in her session. But right before we get started, I need her to tell you all about what she does with her family for Thanksgiving. This is fantastic. Just plan to just do this from now on at your Thanksgiving meal. Amanda, tell us about it.
Sure. So the past couple of years, we've decided to make Thanksgiving kind of a themed meal. So one year it was like Italy and we had different types of lasagna, but this year we're doing pizza. So there won't be a whole lot of cooking, which, you know, everybody wins.
I think this is the best idea. I was saying that our theme is usually ham because we all love leftover ham and it's so versatile. But from now on, we may need to be setting a different theme for Thanksgiving. So Amanda, that's very innovative. From the innovation coach to be innovating even Thanksgiving. I love it. Well, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you for your amazing session about designing for empathy.
Great. Well, I am so excited to be here. Like Lena said, I'm the innovation coach for Center Grove Schools, which means I get to run our innovation center and do the planning and implementation for STEM content for our students K-8, which is really exciting. I also get to work as a coach with our teachers, and I like to say that I have the coolest job in our district because it's pretty fun. Before being here in Center Grove, I was an e-learning specialist and then also a classroom teacher in elementary school. So I'm really excited to share with you today, and I think I'd like to get started by sharing one of my favorite educational quotes. And it says, "When educating the minds of our youth, we must not forget to educate their hearts." And this has stuck with me for years because the idea of being solely focused on content, sometimes I think we miss opportunities. So today I'm going to share with you about design thinking because I think it's an excellent way to educate student hearts. We'll take a quick look at what the design process is, as well as some examples from my classroom, and then also a couple tips in case you are interested in trying some design thinking in your context. So let's begin with a real quick overview of the design thinking process. A lot of times it's associated with STEM or a makerspace, but really it can be applied in any subject area. It's a really powerful teaching tool that you can use in your classroom, even if you don't teach STEM. So let's take a real quick overview. The design thinking process is essentially a cycle of steps. And there's lots of different models. So some models are really complex and others are very simple. Some are focused strictly on engineering and others are more wide open. So the model I'm sharing with you today, I just made up based on my experience with the design process. And I made a really simple model for us to look at today. So typically the first step of the design process has to do with discovering something. So it might be a problem or a topic that you're interested in learning more about. Typically, I think of it as a problem that needs to be solved. And you can look around to find all kinds of problems. You can find them in nature. You might find them in natural phenomena. You might find them in your school building, your community, or even a social issue. And then once you've discovered a problem, we need to understand about it. So in order to actually do something, we have to have a detailed understanding of the problem so that we can address it. And when we design solutions, either for others or with others, we become aware of their challenges, their situations, their hopes, and that really helps us to grow in empathy. And that's how empathy can really be the heart of the design process. Now, of course, you can use the design process to design for yourself, but it's a great opportunity to be others-centered. Now, once we have an understanding, then it's time to create something. We want to create a solution of some kind. It might be a physical product, it might be a community service project, or maybe it's digital media like a video or a website. But whatever it is, as we're making this product, we are constantly thinking about our audience, who we're creating it for. Will it meet the needs of that person or that group. And in that way, we're coming right back to empathy. And then finally, once we've created something, we want to test it out, we want to refine our ideas, and then we want to share them. So overall, this is a very brief example of the design thinking process. So while design thinking isn't exclusive to STEM, it is a pretty natural fit. So I'm going to share some examples with you from when I was in the classroom with my fourth graders. And these examples come from our morning work time. I decided to trade out our traditional paper, pencil, quiet morning routine for something a bit more engaging, a bit more collaborative, that would really help set the tone for the day. So out went the paper and pencil morning work, and in came in design challenges in the morning. Students would work in small groups collaboratively, and their goal was to work through the design process over about the time of a week or two to create something for a challenge. And typically these were engineering based. So let's take a look at a couple examples. So our first challenge that I want to share with you was for my students to create an inclusive playground. The discover step happened because one of our reading units was focused on diversity, and part of that diversity unit was focused on disabilities. So our understanding came from reading nonfiction articles and realistic fiction and getting a better understanding for the challenges and triumphs of people with disabilities. So the students were challenged with creating an inclusive playground. They used simple materials to create a model. They shared them with their peers in order to get feedback and make some revisions. And then we shared ideas with the principal so that when it was time to redesign our playground sometime in the future, she would have an idea of how to make the playground inclusive. Another example, my students were challenged with designing a system to move water from a river to crops. At this time, we were learning about historic Native American groups in Indiana during our social studies time, and we learned about how important farming and the river were to their survival. Our understanding came as we studied these groups, and so the challenge was to help essentially build an irrigation system, although my students don't know what an irrigation system is. So one of my favorite examples, this group made a zip line. And so their idea was to send water from trees through zip lines to get down to the crops, which I thought was fantastically creative and a lot of fun. And one more example. So we wanted to design a communication tool for a nonverbal friend. And after seeing the designs that my students made for the inclusive playgrounds, our high school cadet teacher shared a little bit about his younger brother and his communication needs. So we invited some of our high school students nearby to come over and share with us how they use communication devices to share their thoughts, their wants, their needs. And from that, we came up with some ideas on how to create a very simple, low-tech tool that our cadet teacher's brother could use in order to communicate with their neighbors when they were playing outside together. Now, all of these examples are others-centered, which means it's very easy to be thinking about others and caring about others. But what I love about the design process is it's not just growing in empathy in your heart, you're actually making something and doing something. So there's action attached to it, which is really great. I'd like to share some other ideas with you too, not STEM related. I first started using the design thinking process in my class after reading two really great books, both by the same authors, A.J. Giuliani and John Spencer. And those books are Empower and Launch. And after reading that, I was so inspired that I decided I wanted to try passion projects in my class. And in order to do passion projects, we would work through the design thinking process. So my students used their curiosity in order to come up with all of the topics for our passion projects completely on their own, which is going to amaze you. So prepare yourself. My students were exploring Wonderopolis, which is a website, one day, and some of them came across this question: how does a person become homeless? And they were so interested in it that they shared it with other friends, and soon the majority of my class wanted to do our first passion project on this topic. So in order to understand, we used our reading block during a nonfiction unit in order to learn about research skills. We applied those research skills to study videos and infographics and also text to get a better understanding of this issue. When it came time to create something, my students chose to create care bags and have a service project. So they co-wrote a grant in order to get materials to make care bags. And then we gave those care bags to the food pantry that ran out of our school. And then each student also took a bag with them to give to somebody in need. Another example of our passion projects, not too long after our first project, one of these wonderful young ladies was at home reading online, and she read about Malala, and she told her friends, and they decided they wanted to know why girls in some countries are unable to go to school. So we did more research during our reading block, and they decided that they wanted to create a realistic fiction book. And inside that book, they were going to show characters from around the world. And these young ladies in the book had hopes and they had dreams, and they also had challenges of getting an education. And the purpose of this book was to help grow understanding and empathy in their peers. So once the book was finished, we shared it with our class and then the other fourth grade teachers and their students as well. I had two kiddos, well, probably more than two, but these two really loved football. One of them was reading during independent reading time and read about traumatic brain injury and concussions, and he didn't really understand what that was. So these two wanted to do more research to learn about that. So they decided to create a website to inform their peers about the dangers of concussions and traumatic brain injury. They shared their website with our class and also with a local youth football league. While we were studying the American Revolution in class, we were talking about boycotts, and I gave the example of current day boycotts of deciding not to buy certain products or certain brands due to child labor. And my students were really surprised to hear that child labor and that type of slavery was still happening today in our world. So their group decided to split and do two different projects. These ladies did some art and wrote a poem, and then the other half of their group created a website with the purpose of persuading their friends to boycott certain brands and products due to child labor. Now, these examples, I think, show that the design process is really about problem solving and it's about student creativity. And empathy is at the heart of it all when we can focus on designing for other people. But what really stuck out to me when I was doing these passion projects with my students is that I realized that this empathy and this concern for others, this service mindset, that was already a part of my students. That was already inside of them. And I didn't know it because I hadn't given them an opportunity to show me. And so my idea of my role really shifted in that moment. And my realization is that my job isn't necessarily to teach them how to be empathetic. They already can be. My job is to give them opportunities, to help them through the thinking process, and to empower them to do something about it. So if you're thinking that this is something you would like to try, where might we begin? So I'd like to share with you three main considerations when I began planning. And then after that, some practical tips for you. So when I began planning for any learning experience, like every other teacher, I start by thinking of the content and the standards. What do I want my students to know, and how will I know that they learned it, right? Check. All teachers, that's where we start. But lately, I've had the opportunity to work with Adam Scribner from Indiana University, and he also has a consideration that I have now adopted. He thinks, what qualities and dispositions or characteristics do I want to instill in my students during this learning experience? Maybe it's empathy. Maybe it's growing in confidence, or perhaps it's an interest in conservation or bettering our community. But either way, we have the opportunity to influence our students in more than just content. And then a third consideration that I always think about as I am making my lessons is, what kind of mindset do I want to promote within my students? What do I want them to believe about themselves because of this learning? Typically, my answer to that question is, I want them to believe that they're capable of doing awesome things, of solving real problems. I want them to realize that they don't have to wait until they're older to make a difference. They can do something right now. And of course, I want them to have the mindset that these are positive experiences. They don't have to be good at something right away in order for their work to be good. You know, sometimes the topic of our learning and our lessons naturally falls into these categories, and those are great moments. But if we're very intentional about our planning, then we can help to influence and help students grow in more than just academic ways. And I think that's really powerful. All right, let's wrap up with a couple practical tips. First, the great news, you don't have to start from scratch in your planning. You can absolutely take your current lessons and think about them just a little bit differently. Just a little bit of reframing or a little bit of a shift can help to build an empathy with your class. So take time to have discussions with your students as you're learning about people or groups or cultures. You know, ask questions like, what is their life experience like? How is their life experience similar or different to mine? And how could I show this person kindness? Those simple conversations can help to create a culture of thoughtfulness and other centeredness in your classroom. And also, thinking about real problems is also a super great tip for you, especially when we're thinking about STEM. Sometimes we can do those really fun STEM lessons, but the problem that we're trying to solve is not naturally an everyday occurrence or a real problem. It's contrived. But the power in using real problems is that our students then grow to realize that they have power and influence. And that's really, really great. So I'd like to share one example with you. This year, I reframed a current lesson and added a real problem to try to make our learning a little bit more centered in empathy. The previous lesson was design a parachute while we learn about the scientific process of forces. So forces in motion, gravity, and drag. All it took was a slight shift in mindset. And the new lesson was learn about natural disasters and people who need aid after natural disasters but can't get it because of road closures. And now we're designing parachutes and still learning about the scientific concept with a real purpose, which is helping others. So sometimes all it takes is thinking about your current lessons and shifting your mindset. If you're interested in trying full passion projects or the design thinking process in your classroom, I'd love to partner with you. But one of my favorite outcomes from using this kind of teaching with my students is seeing how they grow not only in empathy, but in their willingness to try new things. When they have these experiences, they believe themselves capable, and that's one of the best gifts that we can give to our students. Not just our beliefs about what they can do, but helping them realize what they can actually do so that they believe it too. Thanks so much for joining me today. I love to collaborate with you or answer any questions that you may have, so don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Amanda, thank you so much. What wonderful information. We were really loving it, chatting back and forth. The qualities and mindset on top of content, just hello, that's perfect. And the way you reframed some standard projects in the classroom that we're accustomed to in just a small manipulation to make that major difference, to build in empathy, authenticity, real world connection. Outstanding. Thank you so much. We loved seeing empathy on display here. How wonderful. And thanks for being part of the InLearning Partnership live stream today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Stick around, everybody. We've got a few more sessions coming up. You won't want to miss the next one starting here in just a few minutes. We've got amplifying student voice, perfect to coincide with building up their empathy. Thanks again, and we'll see you back here in just a few minutes.